Hey everyone. Today we're going to be talking about Michael Jackson. Now this is a name I'm sure about 100% of you are familiar with because even if you don't like his music or even if you're unaware that he was a musician, you can't not have heard of him. Aside from the huge press he's gotten for his career in music, he's also gotten huge press for his controversial nature, the allegations of child molestation, his bizarre lifestyle, the strange physical transformations he's gone through due to extensive plastic surgery, and his spending habits, which basically had him spending money faster than he could make it by buying up everything in sight, including the rights to almost every Beatles song. And then, of course, there was his death in 2009. Something that is still talked about and discussed today as something originally thought to be an accidental overdose is now seen as a possible homicide. Regardless of whether or not you like him or whether you think the things said about him are true or false, you have to admit the man is a legend, if only because people are still talking him just as much 2 years later after his death as they were 2 years before his death, possibly more. Jackson is no stranger to video games. Recently, the game Michael Jackson: The Experience was released for the Wii, DS, Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and PSP. On the horizon, they're actually planning to release a massively multiplayer online RPG called Planet Michael. I don't know what the fuck is up with that, but whatever. Previously, his song Beat It was a part of the game Guitar Hero World Tour, and would even be the last boss song if you were playing the Vocals campaign. Before that, he lent his voice talents to the Dreamcast rhythm game Space Channel 5, playing a character called Space Michael, and he reprised this role in the sequel Space Channel 5 Part 2. Now, before any of that was Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, based on the movie of the same name, which actually has 3 separate versions: the home PC version, the arcade version, and the home console versions, which all played differently. The PC version of Moonwalker was developed by a company called Emerald Software and published by US Gold, but the arcade and home console versions were made by Sega. The home version was kind of a big deal when it came out, and it appeared on the Genesis, Master System, and Game Gear. And believe it or not, it's supposedly coming to the Wii Virtual Console soon. So why did I go through all that shit? Because it was the start of a relationship between Jackson and Sega that didn't actually end there. The legend goes that Michael Jackson composed the music for Sega's hit game, Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Now, let that sink in for a bit. Michael Jackson did the music for Sonic 3. Huh. Well, about half of you are probably going, of course, it makes so much sense, while the other half are waiting for the part where I call bullshit on everything. Because after all, if Michael Jackson did the soundtrack to Sonic 3, surely you would have heard of it, right? Sega would have made a big deal about it, and surely used his name to promote the game, and as not only did that not happen, but Jackson's name doesn't even appear in the credits for the game. Besides, wouldn't Japanese composers work on the game? Well, you'd think that, because usually the games come out in Japan and then later in America, but Sonic has always been a bit weird about that, and a lot of the Sonic games, including Sonic 3, actually were released in America first, and then later in Japan. So, if Jackson composed the music, why isn't he listed in the credits? Well, there are 2 answers to that which generally pop up. The first is that Jackson did indeed compose music for the game, but Sega decided not to use it, perhaps feeling that it didn't fit the game, and used other music. So that would mean that yes, Jackson worked on the game, but no, none of his music wound up in the game. The second story goes that the music in the game was indeed written by Jackson, but that he remained uncredited. There are several reasons why this may happen. Most people say that it happened because of the allegations of child molestation that were levied against Jackson, while others say that Jackson simply chose to remain uncredited. Some people had claimed that Jackson's recent allegations of child molestation led to Sega not wanting to have anything to do with him. After all, they don't want their kid-friendly mascot Sonic the Hedgehog being associated with a kid toucher, so supposedly Sega chose not to credit Michael Jackson in the game. But honestly, that's nonsense. If that were the case, then why would they even use his music? A company like Sega can't just decide to use Jackson's music and not credit him. He would sue them into Kingdom Come if that were the case, unless there was a clause in his contract allowing Sega to do this, something that no entertainment lawyer would allow to happen. If Sega were concerned about their image, they would have just not used Jackson's songs, not used them and then fucked the guy over. But really, I feel this as being nonsense. While it's true that Sega might think that his sexual proclivities would hurt the sale of their game, as I pointed out, they don't have the ability to use his tracks and simply not credit him. It just doesn't work that way. Over the years, neither Jackson himself nor anyone associated with him has ever commented on Sonic 3, so there's been no official confirmation or denial of his involvement in the game, leading fans to endlessly speculate, with some believing it fully, and coming up with remixes showing similarities between the soundtrack of Sonic 3 and other Michael Jackson songs, and some people dismissing it as nothing more than a rumor. And then, of course, there's the camp that says that Jackson did indeed work on the game, but none of his tracks were used. Well, thankfully, I can now clear this up, because as of 2009, someone finally stepped up and told the truth. But you probably didn't hear it. The man in question is Brad Buxer, who worked on Sonic the Hedgehog 3 as a composer, and also worked with Michael Jackson, playing keyboards in live shows in the Dangerous Tour. So here we have someone who is associated with both Michael Jackson and Sega giving us the skinny. Why didn't you hear about this? Because it was told in an interview for Black and White magazine, the official Michael Jackson magazine in France. Now, Buxer himself admits that he's somewhat in the dark, having never actually played the game, so he doesn't know what tracks wound up in the game, but he has confirmed that Michael Jackson did indeed collaborate as a composer for Sonic the Hedgehog 3. He was approached by Sega, who wanted the big-name pop star to be a part of the game, and asked him to compose the music for the game. Jackson contacted Buxer for help. That's not to say that they were the only two composers working on music for the game, but they did indeed write music for it. Because Buxer has never played the game, he's unable to name which tracks, if any, were written by Jackson. As for why Michael Jackson was not credited, well, as I pointed out earlier, legally this could only happen if Jackson himself chose to remain uncredited. Buxer claims that while he's not 100% sure, as he's not Michael Jackson himself, but he does tell us that Jackson expressed a lot of frustration with the sound quality of the Genesis and his inability to get the sound he was looking for out of the 16-bit sound chip. In the end, Jackson likely chose to remain uncredited because he was unhappy with the final product. Of course, we can say that Jackson had to have realized the limitations in the Genesis sound quality, as he had worked with Sega on the MOONWALKER game, which featured 16-bit renditions of many of his own songs. But here I have to state the obvious. Michael Jackson is weird. Sometimes he just chose not to be credited. A famous example would be a role he had on The Simpsons in the episode Stark Raving Dad. For the longest time, no one was even sure if it was really Michael Jackson in that episode, some saying that it was simply a sound-alike. But man, is the real story even weirder. Jackson not only voice-acted in the episode, but he wrote a lot of it, including the song Happy Birthday Lisa and the song Do the Bartman. Despite the fact that it was he who approached Fox about appearing on the show, he insisted instead on using the pseudonym of John J. Smith, receiving no credit for his voice work or writing. What made it weirder is that while it is indeed Michael Jackson talking in the show, the singing was done by a Michael Jackson impersonator named Kip Lennon. The reason behind this? Well, apparently Michael Jackson thought that was funny. Like I said, he was a weird guy, which really makes the Simpsons episode extra funny, as he doesn't play himself, but rather an insane man who thinks he's Michael Jackson. But yeah, I hope that clears a lot of things up. And hey, you guys got a bonus legend with the Simpsons thing. I can tell you that yes, Michael Jackson did indeed write music for Sonic 3, as to which songs from the finished product, if any, were recorded by him, that remains unknown. But what I can tell you is that some of the music that Michael Jackson wrote for the game got reworked into a Michael Jackson song called Stranger in Moscow, which appeared on the album History. I've not heard the song, but maybe if you're familiar with the song and familiar with Sonic 3, you might be able to figure out where it was in the game, if it was there at all. Anyway, that's it for this week. I'll see you guys next week. And let's see, what am I talking about next week? Oh, that's right, Mario, that communist son of a bitch.